Rick and Morty vs. Dungeons & Dragons 2, Issue 4. We start out seeing Rick's family going against a bunch of monsters. I hope interesting things happen and justify me not skipping all of it like I'm tempted to right now because I know they have to survive this. Or else that would be terrible writing. We see Morty tell some people to fire burning things at them, and Jerry says they broke through their front line effortlessly and they need Rick. Then we see Rick going through his adventure, and again, it's just panels separated by time skips where he's effortlessly defeating monsters. What's the point of caring about it? The only thing interesting is that he tries leveling up as a fighter for variety, and cooks up some eggs, and then he tries to be a rogue too, which involves using arrows. So he goes the same path in its adventure as Bard Rick, even though Bard Rick is clearly a different person from him because he wants to take over the world. If trying to be a rogue involves using arrows, why isn't it called Archer then? I thought the Ranger used arrows. Morty never used arrows. He wasn't provided with them by the Dungeon Master last time. So I thought rogues weren't allowed to use arrows. It would be interesting if every class was allowed to use any kind of weapon they wanted, but that would make logical sense. And a lot of RPGs don't like to do that. He befriends one of the monsters, and the monster dies anyways. After that boredom, we see that he got a ring of 3 wishes. Wouldn't he wish himself back home immediately? Rick's told that he's got gifts from his many worshippers and a report on the state of his kingdom. I can only assume he got worshippers from all the monsters he killed. And people appreciate that because I guess they're invasive species and attack their cattle. Wouldn't a Rick immediately get bored from running a place if he gave up on running a store right away? I assumed his gifts would be more interesting than just alcohol, but it wasn't. Also, he's got a battalion. Oh good, there's a purpose to it. Because he's using armies to round up and kill loser Ricks. Again, you'd think that he would have wanted to do that himself, instead of just standing there doing nothing. Out of nowhere, he's told he's been stuck on this planet for 36 years. I guess this place is slower time. You'd think he'd be missing his family like crazy by now. He's told the land is at peace and the kingdom is rich and he's worshipped. And I'm wondering why this guy is able to talk just fine while the civilians are just stuck saying wooden stuff like, "Greetings, quit that shit." And Rick doesn't care about being worshipped and is sick of this, and wants to grab a few things and go home. What took him so long? Also, how's he gonna lose all that power at the end of the arc? Summer's arrow just harmlessly bounces off a monster, and Bard Rick says that it's because the convergence is complete after conveniently taking forever, and our world now follows his laws of magic. So mundane weapons have no effects on monsters. I guess that explains the things that Jerry were confused about. Morty calls out Annika's name, and I guess I'm supposed to take it seriously that characters are getting killed off, but I'm sure they'll all be brought back at the end of the story. Especially with Rick in God mode. So it was only written because that's a realistic thing. So everything Rick's family did to survive was pointless. Good thing it was interesting. So time skips ahead as the world gets taken over, and it's pretty dark and edgy with news reports talking about it. And it skips over to over 13,000 days later. Why did Bard Rick not feel like killing the bad musicians if he was fine with all of this? He's bored, so when he's told that his army is being decimated, he gets excited. Why would it take longer than a second for Rick to win against him? Why would I take him seriously? Rick's a max level wizard. I don't even know what level Bard Rick is. I would assume all of his armies are the ones doing all the fighting, so he's not getting any experience. Rick throws a lance that gets destroyed, and somehow when they put their weapons against each other, Rick's knocked back and burned. Bard Rick tells him that they could have been on the same side, and all he had to do was play his character instead of throwing it away. That doesn't make any sense. So he would have tried to take over his world, even if he didn't throw away his characters? Huh? I thought the whole point of taking over his world was for revenge against him for doing that. Out of nowhere, Rick admits that he always screws up, and every one of those failed characters was a failed part of him and admits that he's evil. This gets Bard Rick to talk for a while, and Rick punches him and magically kills him. If it was that easy, I can't imagine what took him so long. It's not like there was a super interesting fight scene. Barely anything happened. but he insisted on dragging out anyways because he wanted the fight to feel climactic. But it just comes off as underwhelming and lame. Really? This is the end? I always figured I'd hate this arc and only felt like reading it if I'd have to review it. And I was right. I found it really boring to just casually read. Predictably, Rick uses his magic to return everything to normal, complete with the D&D obsession being gone. And yet he's paranoid that it's not gone when Morty still wants to play it and questions Morty a lot. Morty doesn't actually read any books and has terribly unhealthy taste in breakfast. I assume the reason he got rid of his magic willingly was because he was just that bored of D&D, and he didn't want to give up the mad scientist persona everyone already knew him for. He should have explained that though. Because normally the concept of a villain protagonist willingly giving up omnipotent magic would seem unthinkable. Rick says that Morty wanting to be a dungeon master sounds terrifying. Beth wants to be a centaur ranger, and Rick is freaked out by his leniency. Jerry hands Rick a book of Rick's old characters and suggests using them. Rick fails to learn his lesson when for all he knows it's just going to guarantee the same thing will happen again. He throws the paper away. To be fair, I hated those characters too and wouldn't feel satisfied at seeing them honored by him using them. He says if they're all making freaks, then he'll make one too. So he chooses an evil paladin. Summer asks him where he got a great ring on his finger, and Rick realizes that he still has one wish left. Rick then begs the audience to ask for a third D&D arc, which seems totally tone deaf of the writers since his arc sucked. It's a little surprise to me that there wasn't a third one. If there's a third one, the only assumption I'll make is that it's because this arc sold well. I don't know how well it sold, but it shouldn't have sold well. At least there's a realistic reaction to his fourth wall breaking for once, as Jerry asks if they should call a doctor. But I'd much rather see him use his final wish. This disappointing and underwhelming issue was about Rick's family immediately losing to the monster army and Rick having a totally uninteresting adventure in the D&D world full of time skips till you can't get invested in it and feels like it has barely any plot. Until he's as powerful a wizard as possible. And somehow he waited 36 years to magically return things to normal. Even though we knew the loser Ricks wanted to ruin his world. I thought he was in a hurry to get back home. That's why he was mad when he sent back the Borden by the skull. And there's no way it takes 36 years to get to max level in an RPG, so it doesn't make any sense for it to take him 36 years here. I don't buy that he'd take longer than a second to defeat Bard Rick, and would need a cheap shot to do it when he was that powerful. Why didn't he just interrupt him the second he started talking to him when he came back home, and cheap shot him then, and if you need him to start talking to punch him? That was such an underwhelming and unfulfilling story that it doesn't feel like I read an issue at all. But apparently that's the end of the arc. I really hate how things went really dark because Rick's family died and their world was ruined. It's a textbook example of why it's not okay to write that just because there's time travel undoing it. It's still too depressing.